What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show with me, your host, Tara Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, March 18th, and it is March Madness, people. I am so sorry that I am late to those who are listening live on YouTube. Had some child drama, a little bit of, I've got two young boys, and sometimes they like to argue because apparently 6 and 9 is a contentious little age gap there, and I suspect that it will continue on forever. Yes, but they're good, I believe now, so we're good to go. And I most this is happy March Madness, people. March Madness starts tomorrow. Well, we've already got our first 4 games. I don't know if you guys have filled out your brackets yet, but I did finish. It's been a day. Finished my brackets. I had to do PGA DFS, and it's just been that between that and football. This was a busy week. And somehow I also made a poor parenting choice of deciding to schedule 2 doctor's appointments for my kids, one tomorrow morning. I'm not sure what conceptually made me think that scheduling a doctor's appointment the morning that March Madness starts, knowing that I would have videos and stuff due, was a logical choice. But hey, I'm just got to roll with it because that is what I scheduled and decided, so I must stick to it. But we are here, and thank you for joining in. We're going to talk free agency, more free agency. We talked free agency last week. I will take your questions live. Of course, I'm already seeing some questions roll in here for sure. What's up in the chat to Derek Lincoln? What's up, Henry Odom? What's up, Flock Nation? Derek Lincoln says they will get better when they're older. I hope so. Because my oldest boy, he's a very smart kid. They're both smart, but he's a very sometimes they're borderline leadership qualities, and sometimes they're borderline like authoritarian qualities. We're like, we gotta make sure we keep you on the right track there, because it's definitely leadership. Sometimes it can be like with an iron fist leadership, but yes, it's gonna be 2 boys. And made them dinner tonight, and they are going to eat me out of house and home, clearly, but that's okay. We will proceed here. So parenthood, yay. But yes, we're going to talk free agency. Obviously, we're going to start things off talking the Jaylen Waddle trade, because that is big. I already see the question in here, or the comment in here from Henry Odom. Hey, Tara, looking at the Achane situation, I'm having a hard time justifying him as a first-round pick. Let's talk through it here, because I actually don't mind Achane with this whole situation, right? So let's talk about what this does for the Denver Broncos, obviously, and for the Miami Dolphins. Both of these are pretty critical, extremely critical from a fantasy perspective, because, heading into last year, we were feeling good about Denver's offense as a whole and the potential for multiple assets there. And overall, we just got highly disappointed by everyone, just kind of conflicting and no one really standing out. I mean, look at the running back room. I don't think we talked about J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey at all last week. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but that is just the epitome of a running back room that is going to frustrate us to no end, because obviously we know exactly what it is. We know that Sean Payton apparently does not want to give a full workload to R.J. Harvey. So we'll get this nasty little committee with majority of the work on the ground being with J.K. Dobbins, and then majority of the receiving work being with R.J. Harvey. But obviously, we can't justify an RB2 ADP for either one of these guys. So their ADPs are going to have to drop significantly, because the upside, because there's no receiving work for J.K. Dobbins, is capped. So that obviously brings him down to someone who is just a flex option, someone that we just can't consistently rely on to hit top 20 numbers on a week-to-week basis. And then with R.J. Harvey, it's going to be boom bust when he hits and he's got, 5 catches with a touchdown and, breaks off a big run. Yeah, it'll work out for us. And then unfortunately, when it's just 3 catches for 21 yards and no touchdown, it's going to be a highly disappointing week because there's not the groundwork to support it. Now, we have that same issue in the receiving core, and we had it obviously last year because, again, when we were heading into the season, when I say we, I include myself in that, because I was very pro Courtland Sutton last year heading into the season because of what we saw in Bo Nix's rookie season, where as the season progressed in the back half of the season, he literally had Courtland Sutton up there as a top 5 fantasy asset. But again, there were just, unfortunately, the amount of bodies that were utilized in that offense, the emergence of Troy Franklin, who obviously has that natural connection and favoritism from Bo Nix due to college days, the little usage here and there from our extra guys like Marvin Mims and Pat Bryant emerging there a little bit as well, just became a very frustrating situation, especially when you're getting, those dump offs and checkdowns. Bo Nix loves to check down, checkdowns to RJ Harvey. It just wasn't enough pass volume to go around. You couldn't consistently trust who it was on a week-to-week basis. We got comfortable with Troy Franklin for a while. Then he kind of fell off there. Snap counts were inconsistent. At the same time, we never had Courtland Sutton recovering to the level of where we could, trust him as a wide receiver one on a week-to-week basis. Now we've got that same exact offense, and now we throw Jaylen Waddle into the mix, and it's just looking a little bit like a wide receiver room that we don't want to touch, because consistently this offense is not going to be consistent. And as we look at Sean Payton, we can try to say, like, hey, cool. Like, Jaylen Waddle will come in. That's going to eliminate the Marvin Mims and Pat Bryant stuff. That's going to go, to the wayside. So we'll have, Jaylen Waddle and Courtland Sutton and Troy Franklin. But that's an ideal situation in an ideal world. And we can't look at it, anything that Sean Payton will do, from an ideal perspective, right? It will switch up on a week-to-week basis. And even then so, we're talking about three guys, consistently being utilized. I do have confidence that Waddle and Sutton would be the top dogs, but neither one of them has ever really, when there has been additional competition, right? So let's say Courtland Sutton with Jerry Jeudy, right? Or last year, Courtland Sutton with Troy Franklin, or, looking at Miami, Jaylen Waddle with Tyreek Hill. Neither one of them has truly, with the exception of 1 year from Waddle, truly been able to dominate when they're playing alongside a competitive receiver. And that's saying a lot, because it's not as if Jerry Jeudy was highly competitive in general, right? We don't think of him as a top receiver. So these two guys getting together, two that have been, guys that we could look at as a wide receiver one, but, on a year-to-year basis, couldn't trust as a wide receiver one. Now they're playing alongside each other. I don't feel good about it. These are guys that I will not be trusting as my wide receiver. Definitely not wide receiver one, but definitely not my wide receiver two, barely my wide receiver three, probably not really in, 3 starting wide receiver leagues. More of a flex option that, again, would theoretically have high upside if Bo Nix really committed and Sean Payton really committed to one. But are we ever going to trust them to commit to one? No. So I don't love this. Especially I've got, Jaylen Waddle. I was really hoping finally we could, without Tyreek Hill, we could get him back on track, because, his rookie season, we did, get a nice 1,000-yard season. There was no Tyreek Hill there, so we were feeling okay. But at this point, just been a very, very frustrating roster from a dynasty perspective, right? So when we're looking at from a Broncos perspective, hold up. I'm sitting here yapping, and let's get back to Miami, because you guys are in the chat talking about, my phone is silent. Let's see. Do we have these? Yeah. There we go. We are in the, let's see. You guys are saying, hold on. Jerry Jeudy is officially a Raider, is what you're saying. Well, let's see, because I obviously have not been looking at my phone or anything over the past hour or so. So, no. Is that like a wish list or something there? Perhaps? Perhaps a little wish list thing right there. I'll take more of a look at it later here. But again, jumping back to Miami there. Henry Odom now, Malik Willis, or Bo Nix. We'll get to the HM part of that. So, from a fantasy perspective, and I don't have my rankings up yet, but I feel more comfortable with Bo Nix. Quite frankly, with Malik Willis, quite frankly, for the upside, because the point at which we are drafting them, right? And I know instinctually we'll want to say Bo Nix because of more weapons, obviously, a stable offense, a better team in general. In Miami at this point, they're in a very clear rebuild. So trusting a quarterback, a brand new quarterback on a team as a first time starter, right? First time leading an offense consistently on a team that is rebuilding. It's going to be now. Granted, when we think about Malik Willis, we do have to often we do have to approach it from the perspective of he is going to have a wide receiver one. They're not going to send him out there they're not going to send him out there with Malik Washington and Jalen Tolbert. They're not going to do that, right? And whoever else is on that roster right now, it's a mess in the receiving core. It's gutted, right? But clearly their intention is they're going to draft wide receivers, and there's plenty of wide receivers available in this draft. I know we've had some that have been, we had some kind of weird moments at the combine, right? And some questionable 40 times and some questionable interviews and whatnot. But it is a talent-rich wide receiver group overall. And there's lots of day two guys as well. And Miami's pick is pick 11. So logically, they are going to be taking, and if they pass up a pass catcher at pick 11, then I don't really know what to say about their franchise. But theoretically, it's going to be a pass catcher. Now, whether or not that is them going the route of going with Kenyon Sadiq and grabbing him there, and then maybe, potentially trading up and getting another option, or using their round 2 pick, which should be able to get a pretty decent wide receiver as well. They can do that if they want to go that route, but there's going to be a pass catcher, right? They'll be able to get one of the top 3 wide receiver prospects at that pick 11 there. So Malik Willis is not going to be going in there naked, right? He's going to have somebody. We just don't have that somebody right now. He's probably going to have multiple somebodies. It's a true rebuild here. But at the end of the day, we know that we are not going with Malik Willis based off of high pass volume. It's that rushing upside that we like about him. Our sample size is super small, right? But when we look at games where he has started more than 50% of snaps, right? The expectation that we have here based off of those games is a minimum of 40 yards, right? And obviously there will be offensive differences because that was with Matt LaFleur. And while we do have a Green Bay coach here in Miami, it's a Green Bay defensive head coach. And the offensive coordinator is going to be the same quarterback coach that was promoted into offensive coordinator. So we're going to be keeping the same system. But at the end of the day, it's all an offshoot of Kyle Shanahan. Matt LaFleur is an offshoot of Kyle Shanahan. So things are going to be similar. They know exactly what they have in Malik Willis, and they're going to let him be that mobile quarterback here. So from a fantasy, high upside perspective, I would rather take that chance, honestly, if we're talking about QB2s, or even if you're in one QB in a deep league and you want a second QB as a late round option. The higher upside, because of that rushing upside, is going to be Malik Willis. Probably will have Bo Nix ranked a few spots higher, but at that point, if you're picking and choosing, if we're looking for pure upside, Malik Willis will be the one for me. And again, depending on who they take at 11 there, and if I really like whoever they draft on day 2 as well, so that they get, a solid wide receiver 1 inside wide receiver 2, or an additional tight end, right? I can maybe move him up just a little teeny tiny bit, but we were never drafting Malik Willis because he is going to be having extreme upside in terms of pass volume. We were never expecting him to be out there chucking it and throwing it 40 times for 300 yards, right? That's not his game. He was used in more of an efficient way, and he was very efficient, right? Accuracy was not an issue. And again, the ground rushing touchdowns were there as well. Now, as we segue those rushing touchdowns into Devon Achane, because I know there's going to be concern around, we've got a team that is going to be playing from the bottom up, that is losing weapons in their receiving core. We've got a new quarterback in here, a running quarterback, and that might actually, raise your eyes and make you a little bit nervous in terms of Devon Achane. This does not make me want to move him down at all. I feel good about him, quite frankly. And I know that might seem a little bit worrisome, but he will be the most experienced focal point weapon of that offense. And while the team probably will be bad, they are going to be improved from a defensive perspective. So I don't want to say anoint them and say that they're, not going to get into a whole bunch of blowouts and that it won't be a destitute situation. But I will say that while I think they're going to lose, I think they should be somewhat competitive in those losses. And regardless of that, they cannot abandon the run to an extent where HN would disappear because he has that receiving upside. So game script wise, he's pretty well established. In fact, from the perspective of if they're playing from ahead, okay, cool, right? But playing from behind and having to increase checkdowns and his usage in the pass game, that's not a bad thing for us. So I would not be wary of them playing from behind. When it comes to Devon Achane, I still like him. And also when we're talking about Devon Achane, obviously, I do expect Malik Willis to take rushing touchdowns, right? But at the end of the day, the rushing touchdowns were never really the bread and butter, right, of Devon Achane. Like last year, when we were having that early season, I'm pulling up his stats right now, but last year when we were having those early season debates between, oh my God, what are we doing with Devon Achane? We've got, remember Tyreek Hill was out there yapping, talking about how, at the goal line, we don't want to be running Devon Achane, but we can run a Jaylen Wright, which was weird, because you would have thought conceptually he would have said Ollie Gordon, because Ollie Gordon was the bigger back. Jaylen Wright is not the bigger back. But at the same time, I told you guys we weren't concerned about that because Achane's bread and butter from a fantasy perspective is not the goal line touches. We don't care about that. Matter of fact, you can take those away, and honestly, it's not going to make me panic in any way, shape, or form. So Malik Willis contributing at the goal line as a runner is not going to take away that overall usage from Devon Achane, right? Let me see if I can pull up red zone stats here real quick. Because off the top of my head, I remember what we talked about heading into last season, but I don't know if I ever looked up at the end of the day the attempts for Achane inside the 20 and the 5. So Achane's attempts inside 2025, running back attempts inside the 20. Achane was not super high, to be honest. He only had 32 attempts inside the 20. For perspective, Christian McCaffrey had 74. Josh Jacobs, 52. Jahmyr Gibbs, 51. Travis Etienne, 51. He was down there with, and this will, make you feel a little bit better, the number of carries that he had in the red zone were the same, one difference than Kenneth Walker from that perspective. So this was never our bread and butter. I'll lower it down to inside the 5. Achane inside the 5 was, let's see here. Achane inside the 5 had 5 carries inside the 5. He had only 5 carries inside the 5 and 1 touchdown inside the 5. So again, and even inside the 5, it wasn't like we were getting a bunch of receiving work as well. 1 catch, 1 touchdown inside the 5. So his usage, not a massive concern for me that we have Malik Willis coming there as a running quarterback, because taking away from that goal line or those red zone opportunities isn't going to affect him, because that was not the bread and butter of his game. So if you were having fears about Devon Achane, don't worry. I'm not adjusting his ranking there. Again, we're going from a pure volume perspective in terms of receiving work. And again, the receiving work inside the red zone wasn't massive anyway. Christian McCaffrey, 20 receptions inside the red zone. Devon Achane, 7 receptions inside the red zone, 3 touchdowns, right? So we're going with the overall usage across the field. We're not hyper concerned about the fact that the offense probably isn't going to produce a bunch of points. Malik Willis, again, goal line usage, right? Running, not a massive issue. And as a matter of fact, it could potentially open things up for him, because now you've got the threat, right, of a true running quarterback in Malik Willis, who is very talented with his legs. So if you've got to account for that, perhaps that can open things up a little bit for Devon Achane to get out in open space, right? Like imagine we get a little play action, maybe a little check down to from Malik Willis to Devon Achane. And we've got these defensive players focused on making sure that Malik Willis, doesn't break off a run, right? And then you get Devon Achane, not paying attention to him, big catch, run. So honestly, quite frankly, that could work out as a positive as well. So there are no negatives, in my opinion, in terms of how it affects Achane's game, just all positives for me. So I feel good about him. The only other thing that I will touch on with Miami, again, for anyone just tuning in, we talked about the negatives. We're not happy about Jaylen Waddle and Cortland Sutton being on the same team. Makes them more of all flex options, unfortunately. Just knowing Sean Payton, not super reliable. But the other caveat in this is whoever Miami does draft to be their wide receiver 1, probably again, and pick a number 11, we're probably going to get a pretty good ADP discount on him. Imagine this is going to be someone like Mekhi Lemon, right? Or Jordan Tyson, right? That's probably what we're looking at, like probably a Jordan Tyson, right? So we're talking about a Jordan Tyson drafted into an offense where he will have no competition, or a Kenyon Sadiq as well. I'm open to the idea. I'm sure they are too, of a tight end, a highly talented tight end. So, imagine we've got this new young rookie, highly talented coming in, and we'll have no competition in the receiving corps, none at all. And we've got a bad offense, and we've got a quarterback that we know is going to be throwing for low volume. So we're not going to raise the ADP significantly here. So he'll be a nice, I don't like mid-round, yeah, but probably maybe like a 8-9 kind of range there, not juiced up too much there. So one of those picks where you can make an investment and will it hit right away in week 1? No, but you'll be drafting him as a flex play or a, first off the bench option, and can develop into something, maybe mid-season, grow that rapport and gain that trust and be a fantasy hit as a rookie there. So there's that aspect as well. So, there's reason to stay excited about Miami. It's possible. Let's see there. Jumping back here. Derek Lincoln says, yeah, it's crazy to say, but Waddle would have been better off staying in Miami. That's true. And I was kind of looking forward to it, because again, we've seen him without Tyreek Hill. It was a rookie season. He had 1,000 yards. We know he's talented enough to do it. And, even if say what you want about, Malik Willis, but at the end of the day, we don't need a ton of volume. We just need good volume. And his accuracy was not an issue in Green Bay. So yeah, I would have preferred for him to stay in Miami at this point, but is what it is. It is what it is. All right. Jumping back to some additional free agency stuff as well. That was crazy. I was not expecting that one. Now, the Dolphins claim they have zero interest in trading. They have zero interest in trading Devon Achane. But, teams claim a lot of stuff, so we'll see there. One thing that we didn't talk about last week, I don't think we talked about tight ends, really. We've got some interesting tight end situations, obviously. I'm going to pull up our draft rankings for tight ends right now. I've got 5,000 tabs open for, I don't know, Jesus Christ. I've got 5,000 tabs open for a wide variety of college basketball teams. Because I got parlay videos to make for basketball. So yeah, if you have any interest in college basketball, NBA, but I'm not doing NBA right now because of college basketball being so heavy, or golf, feel free to follow me on Twitter because I don't post any of that content. I don't do any of that content on my YouTube channel. It's just fantasy football. But if you follow me on Twitter, you can see all of my videos for other sports as well. So yeah, I've got 5,000 tabs open with a wide variety of basketball teams because I've got parlay videos to make for tomorrow morning for the first day of March Madness. But jumping into tight ends right here, tight end is going to be fun, I think, this year. Very interesting because this is a very different tight end ADP than we typically have. I feel like over the past several years, tight end ADP has been very standard, right? And because of, Travis Kelce falling off and George Kittle getting the injury, hate that so much, Mark Andrews being Mark Andrews now, all this wide variety changes, these new young players as well. We've got all these adjustments, right? And we've got some changes in terms of free agency that are going to make things very, very interesting here. Obviously, at the top, we've got Trey McBride. I feel like we've talked about Trey McBride a lot. I know I've made multiple videos on Trey McBride and the fact that we feel, very grateful that Arizona has so graciously decided to tank, give us Jacoby Brissett, and Jacoby is going to give us some, Trey McBride touchdowns and volume. So we can't complain about that. Trey McBride, and honestly, as I'm looking at, I feel like in theory, He should get gassed up to into the first round pick, but he might not. He might just be more of that second round pick in the same range we were getting him last year, a mid to late round, which is crazy because the upside that he offers is legitimately insane with Jacoby Brissett. But there might be some baked in skepticism that people have towards the team overall. So if we can, get him as a, mid to late second round pick, that would be insane. Be very pro drafting Trey McBride this year at that ADP. After that, we got Brock Bowers. Obviously, we'll want to see what the Raiders do. Well, Fernando Mendoza, but in terms of adding an additional pass catcher at receiver there. Then we've got Colston Loveland coming on strong last year. Tucker Kraft, Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin Jr., Sam Laporta, Kyle Pitts is interesting right now. Kyle Pitts is at, this is the very interesting range here, in my opinion. So we've got Tyler Warren. So we've got our tier 1 guys, right? Which is Tucker Kraft is apparently in the tier 1. We'll have to see how he comes off of that injury. A healthy version of him for sure. But again, we got a, guy coming off of an ACL injury. So that is concerning. He is young though. But tier 1 is, Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, Colston Loveland, Tucker Kraft. This tier 2 of tight ends is very interesting. And I think, I don't know if any of our free agent changes will work into that, but I did want to touch on this real quick because it was catching my eye and I figured we just go with it. Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin Jr., Sam Laporta, Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid. I don't consider Dalton Kincaid part of that group there. I would cut him off because the addition of DJ Moore there, while I don't feel super positive about the high upside of DJ Moore in the Bills offense, just because I don't think that offense of Joe Brady can actually support the wide receiver 1. Again, that it's still a significant presence in terms of threat to target share for Dalton Kincaid. But Tyler Warren there, with Michael Pittman gone, could be very significant for him. Harold Fannin Jr., obviously, the Raiders, not the Raiders, the Browns, well, saying the Raiders and the Browns, it feels interchangeable at this point here. But at least the Raiders on our upward trajectory. The Browns, the Browns are in such a weird situation, but at the end of the day, more than likely, he will remain the first look in that offense. Now, it's a different offense, but he is the most talented pass catcher in that group by far. Sam Laporta could have, and he was fine last year, but I could even see like a higher resurgent towards his rookie season with the addition of Drew Petzing as the offensive coordinator, because Drew Petzing, obviously working with Trey McBride there, and we saw plenty of volume and usage with him. So I feel very positive about that connection there. And then we talked about Kyle Pitts, and while the Atlanta situation with Kevin Stefanski is so frustrating, and now Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix. I don't know if we've talked about the combination of Tua and Michael Penix yet on this show, but that is such a frustrating offense as a whole. But at the end of the day, we know one thing about Kevin Stefanski, regardless of who is at quarterback, and I kind of low-key do think it's going to end up being Tua, regardless of who is at quarterback, we know that he is sending a solid 30% of target shares to the tight ends. And while they did add an additional tight end, obviously the focus is going to be on Kyle Pitts. So I would expect a massive increase in terms of target share towards Kyle Pitts. If he remains in this, 6 to 8 range, 6 to 9 range in terms of rankings, that's a massive discount on him in the upside that he could have, in my opinion. It's entirely possible that he out-targets Drake London, as crazy as that sounds. And that is no offense to Drake London. It's just the perspective that we have from a Kevin Stefanski offense and how heavily he has consistently utilized tight ends as a head coach there. And again, he's bringing his offensive coordinator and Tommy Rees. So it's the same thing. Like, we know what this offense is. So this should aggressively benefit Kyle Pitts. But guys who are falling outside of that range, obviously, in the big changes that we've got here. One of them is Isaiah Likely, who I think will, as we kind of get people updating rankings and coming more to terms with understanding the Giants offense, I think we'll see Isaiah Likely shift up in rankings to the point where arguably you would take him over, especially after, so for right now, that tier 3 starts off with Oronde Gadsden, then Jake Ferguson, Jawan Johnson, Travis Kelce, Brenton Strange, George Kittle, and then Isaiah Likely. Apples to apples, if you're looking at all of those guys, technically speaking, maybe with the exception of Travis Kelce, just because of a pure volume perspective from and favoritism from Patrick Mahomes, for the most part, all of those guys are going to very easily end up being the third look or maybe even, potentially sometimes the fourth look in their offense. Arondé Gadsden has to contend with Lad McConkey and Quentin Johnston. And, a lot of people think that the Chargers might add an additional pass catcher in the draft, or at the very least, I kind of don't lean that direction. My opinion is that they like Trey Harris and that they'll raise him up in terms of increasing. And they did. Towards the end of the season, you could clearly see they were trying to work him in and trying to minimize that role for Keenan Allen, right? But at the end of the day, at the very least, there's two pass catchers that are going to be potentially ahead of him. Jake Ferguson, we'll have to figure out if Dallas is going to be able to work out a long-term deal or if they end up, trading George Pickens or whatever. But if it's CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, we know what that is for Jake Ferguson, right? That gives him no upside. That's someone that we want to avoid, right? Then we've got Juwan Johnson, who you guys know I feel positive about, but I also feel very positive that we're going to see an additional receiver added. And if there's an additional receiver added, that is where you come into the issue of Juwan Johnson no longer being that second look. We also have Travis Etienne added, who is obviously a very fine pass catcher as well, very clutch pass catcher. Love him. So makes things a little murky for Juwan Johnson. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, Isaiah likely could very well end up being the second look in this offense. We should see potentially the Giants adding another wide receiver in the draft there. They did add Darnell Mooney, which makes me happy. I would expect Darnell Mooney to finally be, his usage in Atlanta was not my favorite, right? His usage in Chicago was not my favorite either. I would expect him to be utilized a little bit more in the slot. He is a smaller receiver. Slot fits a little bit better for him than a receiver. Not super small, but just thinner, right? I think like 5'10" or 5'11", like 180, something like that. So he's a smaller guy. He would do very well in the slot, play versatile, sometimes on the outside as well. But at the end of the day, playing in the slot and opposite of Malik Neighbors when he's healthy is a good role for him. But we'll have to see what they do in terms of adding in a pass catcher there, because obviously that pick that they have there is kind of in flux. There's a lot of thinking that if Jeremiah Love is there, that he could easily be the pick there for the Giants. And I know people feel weird about that because of Cam Scatterbo, but at the end of the day, I don't think the Giants want to hang their franchise on Scatterbo. No offense to him whatsoever. It was a big injury, right? And I don't know if he is ultimately that franchise running back. I could easily see him being one of those guys that, pops off in a rookie season, does end up being usurped by someone else, right? But if they don't take Jeremiah Love, there's the potential of them taking a Carnell Tate, right? Or if they go a completely different direction and they bypass receiver, that does open things up for Isaiah Likely, who is now being reunited with his head coach. We know he likes him, and Isaiah Likely can handle volume, and he is a big receiver, right? Not more of a traditional tight end. So there's really very interesting potential there. Looking comment here from Greg Stallcup, Jake Tonjes could be a sleeper as well. I think so too. I was a little surprised as I was sitting there reading off the rankings and seeing that people still have Kittle. And I get it, for right now. He is consensus tight end 15. I mean, I guess you have to defer to the potential that he returns, somewhat early in the season, but I mean, we're talking a 32-year-old tight end in Achilles. I don't want to be negative, but I mean, at a very late injury, you don't want to be negative, but at the end of the day, I would probably, be on the side of caution that we're looking at maybe a mid-season return, probably a late season return, especially knowing the way that San Francisco in general, and this is knowing just like a team's tendencies, right? They don't rush players back from injury. We saw how long Ricky Pearsall lingered, right? George Kittle had ample amount of time to, recover from his injury at the start of the season. So when we're looking at it from that perspective, yeah, Jake Tonjes could be the guy for a good chunk of the season. We know that when he fills in for Kittle, hey, He's not Kittle, but he is a perfectly fine fill-in. They have zero problem trusting him as a pass catcher, zero problem trusting him as a red zone target. And that's another team where we have to look at what they do at receiver, right? Because as of right now, we're talking about Mike Evans, which, great. But again, older guy who, can we trust him to make it through, play more than half a season at this point? I don't know. This is 2 years in a row that the hamstrings have taken him. Oh, God, terrible. But we will see. I do love Mike Evans as a fit, like a perfect fit for San Francisco. But he's just got to make it through, right? So Jake Tonjes will be an important piece. Obviously, Ricky Pearsall, we need to see him make it through a season as well. In theory, we would like to see San Francisco add an additional pass catcher there. So in terms of a wide receiver, but Tonjes could be the guy at tight end, a very valuable sleeper option for sure, and probably won't get gassed up. Like if I had to guess what people's draft tendencies would be, I mean, it's entirely possible that most people prefer to draft a Mark Andrews over a Jake Tonjes, which doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because they think, oh, Isaiah likely gone and whatnot. But at the end of the day, and plus it sounds like they could add another tight end, right? But at the end of the day, I would rather take that upside of the young Jake Tonjes, who showed very well last season, than go with some of these like middling options, right? Yeah, that would be my preferred route there. Jumping back to some of these comments here from Easy E13. Yeah, Buffalo won't just be dependent on Moore, like you said. Their offensive coordinator doesn't really rely on a wide receiver. Yeah, and that's why I think like Khalil Shakir could be a very interesting late round target, right? Because we're seeing that, and his ranking hasn't, let me see. Because last week we talked about him, or I think we talked maybe a little bit, but last week his ranking hadn't updated significantly. And I don't judge that at all because I'm super slow right now to update my rankings. But as of right now, I mean, he's listed as wide receiver 50 behind guys like Stephon Diggs and Jaden Higgins. Jawan Jennings, right? And quite frankly, we'll see some shifts to where you'll see Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed and Josh Downs will all push up ahead of him. So we're going to be getting a significant discount on Khalil Shakir. And Khalil Shakir's role isn't actually affected by DJ Moore because those are two completely different roles. Shakir's in the slot, right? DJ's on the outside. Obviously, any kind of talented pass catcher does affect target share, but his role will still exist, right? So I think, we shouldn't overreact, right? Because unfortunately, from a offensive scheme perspective, they don't aggressively rely on a wide receiver one. And it is what it is, right? So you would rather, do you want to take a DJ Moore who is going to be ranked super high? I've seen him as ranked as high as wide receiver 17. That's a little aggressive for me. I know we love Josh Allen, but that's aggressive, man. I'd rather take the discount on a late round option to see where that heads there. From Easy E, Dobbs is going to be busy in New England, I believe. I hope so. I hope so. Because I got a Dynasty share that would love that. Especially because it's got Jaylen Waddle on that team. Ugh. If the receiving core remains the same, yes. I fear, because it sounds like I don't trust them not to try to make some kind of trade to add another receiver, and I don't trust them not to draft another receiver. But I will say the good news is they don't draft. They're drafting at wide receiver. It's been a little suspect recently, right? Been a little suspect in terms of their approaches there. But I do think that Dobbs could very well end up being the guy. And when we look at as much as Stephon Diggs' year last year was it was disappointing, right? But he was technically 8th in receptions. He was top 10 in receptions at receiver, which is crazy because you don't think about you remember some games where it's okay, yeah, there was a little pop-off game, but it wasn't a significant, massive game, right? The volume was there. He just wasn't particularly effective with it, in my opinion. So I do think that a Romeo Doubs, obviously, who was, younger, a little more pop to him, could get in there, take those 80 plus receptions and literally run with it. He's always been a very reliable guy. It's just unfortunately that Green Bay offense spreads the ball around too aggressively. It'll be interesting to see how people react to the exit of Romeo Doubs in terms of Green Bay receiving core, because at the end of the day, it's still going to be a wide receiver by committee situation, but it does open up the door, I think, for because Jaden Reed is still a little suspect in terms of reliability. But yeah, Matthew Golden did showcase exactly what we knew about him in terms of just stupidly good hands, right? Very reliable, good routes, right? He just didn't get the opportunities to really get out there and operate from a significant perspective. So we'll see. And then of course there's Christian Watson, who could really just take over and really thrive here. So it'll be interesting to see how people react towards those ADPs. Actually, curiosity has hit me. Christian Watson's ADP, or not ADP, I'm looking at rankings. Christian Watson's ranking right now is wide receiver 26. That's very reasonable. That's very reasonable. And his highest ranking is wide receiver 22 at this point. That's not really aggressive, to be quite frank. So, yeah, I think people see him as, a steady wide receiver 3, not a ton of upside, but we know that if he stays healthy and on the field, those touchdowns from Jordan Love are flowing to him. So that's an interesting one, because he's being drafted right behind a Mike Evans, behind Jaylen Waddle for now. Obviously, that'll adjust, right? People just haven't adjusted right there in terms of his ranking now that he's in Denver. Right ahead of an Emeka Egbuka. So yeah, you know what? I can get on board with that. That's not a bad situation. James Kohler says, could Waddle become the possession receiver and Sutton a boom bust or touchdown dependent receiver? Yeah, I think it's entirely possible. As I'm sitting here, my son has come in and demanded that I give him vitamins.
No, I did not say that.
Oh, okay. He claims he did not say that. Okay, thank you, buddy. All right. Peace out. Thanks. Mid-second advertisement for random Amazon vitamins for your child. So good that they will interrupt your show to get a couple of those yummy gummy vitamins. But yeah, going back to Jaylen Waddle Jaylen Waddle for the possession receiver and Courtland Sutton boom bust. Yeah, it's very possible that is the split that makes the most sense there. But again, do we trust Sean Payton to make the most sense is our only question there. And I low-key, then I have another fear that he'll go and do something ridiculous, like draft one of these high-end tight ends. I would, God forbid, we get Eli Stowers drafted. I'm sorry, that's something that Sean Payton, he's our fantasy nightmare at this point. It's entirely possible he does that. But yeah, he could become, the more reliable, consistent volume guy. But and it makes sense again, size-wise, right? But at the same time, I just don't know if I trust it enough to invest it. But if I did have to stake my claim and say I want one versus the other, I think I would lean towards Waddle. It's tough because Bo Nix does seem to be more of a rapport guy, and I think that is why we had such the heavy usage of Troy Franklin last year. So we'll have to get that built-in rapport to happen there. But if they can build that rapport, volume to Waddle would make more sense, and then the boom bust touchdown dependent from Courtland Sutton, because he's our big dude, our big wide receiver. So that is definitely a more natural role for him. Let's see here, jumping back here, going to some of these comments. I'm going to go back in the comments to make sure that I show all of these. Where we at? Crazy 77 said I'd take Malik Willis in Superflex. Yeah, I think he can be a big Superflex cheat code, which reminds me, I need to sign up for Scott Fishbowl now that I think about Superflex teams. I would love to get him in the Scott Fishbowl. Easy E 13. Yeah, if I can't get Trey McBride or Bowers, I'll wait and roll the dice. Yeah, because we got some nice mid-round tight ends. Yeah, Trey McBride, Bowers. Although the I can put not Courtland Sutton, Colston Loveland. I could put Colston Loveland in that list of 3 that I would jump at. I didn't think about it though. But man, he came on strong. But at the end of the day, it is, when those rookies do come on strong, the year 2 rebound can be aggressive, so we probably should, exercise some caution. But with DJ Moore gone there, it's just going to pique our interest even more. From Dion Polk, 22, who are some sleepers that you like in the upcoming NFL draft? Yeah, let's pull up some. Actually, let's look here. Let's see. Let me pull up my combine stuff and look at some of the players that I liked heading out of the combine here. This is funny. Combine was such a weird one for me at running back. I'm not going to lie here. I don't have any sleeper running back because I don't like this running back class. For me, I like, especially as we, look at some of these guys last year that we got as round 2 picks that weren't traditional 3 down backs like a Travion Henderson that went into certain situations that did not benefit them, even though we love their talent, right? So it makes you a little bit apprehensive of some of these kind of, some of these running backs that are going to be those day 2 picks, right? That only have one particular skill set. They've showcased that, they're great receivers, have that high upside, a great early down backs, right? But a lot of the running backs disappointed me. Really outside of Jeremiah Love, the only running back that I felt really compelled with was obviously Mike Washington Jr. In terms of a running back that I think that could land in a landing spot, like my preference would imagine a Seattle, because we know that Seattle at this point, we talked about it last week, probably is going to have to take a running back because they did not dip into free agency the way that we thought they would. They let Kenneth Walker go, right? We've got Zach Charbonnet, who I find it hard to believe is going to be ready to start the season. Likelihood there is that, especially consider that they draft so well, mind you, that, day 2 picks for them were round 2 picks at running back were Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker. So they scout well, they know what fits their offense, and they identify talent excellently. So I do think that if we got somebody like a Mike Washington to Seattle, that would be a massive win for me. That wouldn't end up being a sleeper because I think we would all end up jumping there. But that was the only running back outside of Jeremiah Love that made me happy. But there are some very interesting wide receivers. I think one wide receiver sleeper that I fell in love with was Skylar Bell. That's a very interesting one, right? Because when we looked at him, there were a lot of guys from a 40 perspective that really weren't impressive. And he got a 4.4, good measurables, good athletic score, good vertical jump, good broad jumps, all that good stuff. He looked really good in the gauntlet drill. That's always very important there. So Skylar Bell is one that is on my list for a lot of my Dynasty watch lists there. Someone that I thought was very interesting as well was Jacoby Lane. Solid 40. I don't know if I'm not sure if he'll qualify in the sleeper category. But that was another one that I liked as well at the combine there. He showed good speed because we had been getting a lot of Jacoby Lane comps to Keon Coleman, but I think the speed that he showed kind of pulled him off of there. I would anticipate that depending on where he lands, he might be one of those round 2 wide receivers for us in terms of Dynasty rookie drafts. So that's another one. But those are 2 of my favorites. And then I do I like the tight end class a lot. I think there's some very interesting tight ends. Obviously, we have, Kenyon Sadiq that's going to go very high in the first, right? And then Eli Stowers showed very well. I think he will get a very decent draft pick as well. Potentially a late first, definitely a day 2, probably second round pick. But there's some other tight ends from a receiving perspective that are very interesting. Tanner Koziol is one, very, very tall, 6'7" from Houston. Showcased extremely well at the Senior Bowl. I really, really like him in what kind of is overall a very questionable draft class at tight end in terms of after you get out of those top 4 or so. But that's another one that we look at. So I think there's some interesting tight ends that might pop up more than we have running backs. I'm not a big fan of the running backs, unfortunately. They didn't speak to me this year. But I kind of knew that heading into the Senior Bowl and the Combine, as we're kind of looking through prospects. We're looking at each position. We know the quarterback class is weak, but other than that, the running back class, I think, is just kind of a little bit of a letdown in terms of comparatively to what we've gotten in previous years. So it'll be interesting. I think the receivers are where we're going to find some good little bread and butter there. But jumping back here, let's see. Oh, good. I think we're all caught up on comments here. Yeah, I think we're pretty good here. Looking at comments, I think we're all caught up. Perfect. So jumping back to tight ends was the conversation that we were on, and I think I got a little sidetracked there. But jumping back to the tight ends there, Isaiah Likely. After that, Dallas Goedert remaining in Philadelphia is something that we should theoretically monitor. Last year was so weird. It was actually his best season. You wouldn't have I don't know, off the top of your head, you wouldn't have thought it was a fantastic. Well, yeah, I guess we all remember, but it was such a weird season, right? Because Philadelphia as a whole was underwhelming. Jalen Hurts was struggling, wide receivers were complaining. AJ Brown was reading books and frustrated, right? Now we've got all the trade drama. One of the things that kind of went overlooked is the fact that Dallas Goedert was literally a touchdown magnet for Jalen Hurts. Now, will that repeat, obviously, when we got the offensive changes? But it's something to keep our eye on as we continue to have this drama about the potential trade of AJ Brown. I don't think it's going to happen, but ultimately it's a possibility, right? So we'll keep our eye on that just to see how that turns out. Another one that is interesting, we might have talked about this a little bit, but Chigo Okonkwo in Washington could be something for us to pay attention to in terms of late round value, especially in tight end premium. Washington wide receiver 2 is still wide open, right? We've got Terry McLaurin. Chig has not really been a big volume guy, but obviously, being in Tennessee, he was not really going to be a big volume guy. The tight end usage, and we do have offensive changes in terms of coordinator in Washington as well, but the tight end usage there has been very strong. Obviously, at this point, it doesn't feel like they trust Ben Sinnott. They have to replace Zach Ertz, right? And Zach Ertz has been very fantasy relevant over the past couple of years there. So if you give that volume that he's had to a younger, more talented in this moment, Chigo Okonkwo, I think he could, do a little something special with that. So that's another one for us to watch out for there. One that I did want to touch on, which does not matter from actually, let's touch on a few things that don't matter from a fantasy perspective in terms of us using them. But, in terms of how they affect the offense overall, Dawson Knox was extended. Go figure. So when we look at that, the usage that he has had, obviously we don't use him from a fantasy perspective, but more than likely he will continue to split that work with Dalton Kincaid. We have DJ Moore added in. It's just nasty, right? It just that's another layer to what makes me, lower on Dalton Kincaid than consensus will be, unfortunately. We saw Tyler Higbee is staying in LA. Again, not fantasy relevant, but, important for us to note for those of us who are rooting for some of those young tight ends to potentially break out there. Saints signed Noah Fant, not big deal. But, again, we were talking about Juwan Johnson, the potential there of, Fant to steal a couple of receptions, in a game. And then on top of that, them clearly going to add a secondary pass catcher in terms of a new wide receiver in the draft. Yeah, that's, again, something little that could affect things as well. So just kind of tiny things to pay attention to. And then we'll do one more comment here. Good question. Henry Odom, are you expecting Barkley to be an RB1 redraft this year? Yeah, and I will be significantly higher on Barkley. That will be one of my guys heading into the season. I did not have any Saquon Barkley in redraft, I believe. But I did have a, decent amount in best ball just because, right? But I will have a lot more of Saquon Barkley in redraft this year because of the fact that I like to play workload games with running backs. That's one of the most critical things for me. Barkley was coming off of a just ridiculous workload from 2024 into 2025. So a natural decline in efficiency was bound to happen. So I'm not shocked that he had a bad 2025. It makes total sense. You have the dumbest amount of workload humanly possible in 2024. You carry it all the way through a Super Bowl. Yeah, you got overworked. And unfortunately, that's what happens to your body. So a down year last year when the Eagles offense was also in a down year, hey, not a big deal to me. I do expect him to bounce back this year, and I think we will get a nice discount on him. Looking at where he is ranked right now. He is currently ranked RB9, and there's a pretty decent range of rankings for him. I see as high as RB5 and as low as RB13. That's a good discount, guys. That is coming behind guys like, Amari Hampton, Ashton Genty, Devon Achane, James Cook. I will be lower on James Cook for the same reason that I was lower on Saquon Barkley last year, because of the fact that, unfortunately, you get those nasty rebounds from high workload. And James Cook did have the highest workload of his season. Not super aggressive, so I don't think it needs to be a full fade, but just something to be a little cautious on, that will be his clear highest usage season. So regression does tend to come a little bit there. So just be a little aware, because we've raised him up significantly in rankings. He's RB5 right now. So keep your eye on that. But yeah, I like Saquon Barkley where he's being drafted. That's a nice discount there. Overall, he is looking like, let's see, where is Saquon? Late round 2 pick. That's very reasonable. I'm okay with it. So yeah, Saquon Barkley should be fine this year. Will be a rebound, better volume, better usage, and hopefully better days for the Philadelphia offense. From Cruz and Shaker. Is there any player that was good last season that you feel might be fool's gold heading into this season? Oh, that's a good question there. Let me see. Is there one that I am highly skeptical of? I hate to say this, and I'm just going to answer because I'm on the running backs page, and so this one caught my eye real quick. I hate to say it, but Kyren Williams, and I've been very pro Kyren Williams for a couple years now. So for me to say this, I do think is a big deal. I think we continue to see that split usage with him and Blake Corum. I do not think that Blake Corum is going to be coming for his job in terms of taking it over as a whole. But if we continue to see this split workload, all it does is just cap a ceiling, unfortunately. And we know that those guys don't get massive usage in terms of checkdowns from Matt Stafford anyway. Like, just Sean Payton is not into massive usage of, running backs from a receiving perspective. He makes me a little bit nervous there because right now, and the ADP has come down. It's not as high as it was last year. Ranking has come down. Last year, we were drafting him as RB12 or so. Now he is RB17 in rankings, right before, and this is where it gets weary for me, right before Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne. Those are two things that make me uncomfortable. I would much rather draft either one of those running backs before him. Because those are guys that will have, the workload of their team to themselves 100% there. I know maybe Alvin Kamara being on roster might make people a little bit nervous since he's refusing to leave, and I don't know if the Saints are ultimately going to cut him or not. But at the end of the day, they paid out Travis Etienne RB1 money, so whatever is going on there with Alvin Kamara, it's off to the side, unfortunately. After that, obviously, things get a little bit shaky. But even then, so you have other people that could end up being, rising up in rankings, like David Montgomery taking over as an RB1 there in Houston. Again, we saw what happened when Joe Mixon got traded and became the RB1 in Houston. They gave him 100% of the workload, right? Obviously, there will be, potentially some usage there for what he marks. But at the end of the day, could have a very interesting situation there. Obviously, you look at a Jacksonville, Bashal Tutin, does he take over the job 100%? We could move him up in rankings. So yeah, there are guys that are sitting behind him. You could even go to Pittsburgh and try and figure out what's going on there with, between Jaylen Warren and Rico Dowdle, right? Does Quinshon Judkins heal enough to start the season healthy? He's the clear RB1 there. So Blake Corum is one of those ones where it's like, okay, I can trust him for, a good, 10 to 14 carries a game, he'll be splitting workload there. Obviously, he'll get good yardage because the offensive line is fine and there's opportunities. But at the end of the day, that one right there it doesn't sit right with me because there's a clear upside limitation there. He's capped, and you can't put up those RB1 numbers. And I want guys who have the capabilities of having those high ceilings, right? You don't want to play it super safe in that area. So that's one that I love him, but unfortunately that one makes me a little bit wary. And I'm trying not to be like, oh, Blake Corum's going to take over, right? Because I hate to be that like hot takey, but at the end of the day, it is kind of worrisome, unfortunately. From Greg Stalkup, if he lands in the right spot, we were talking about Kenyon Sadiq in the tight end conversation, 100%. I'm so excited. And, even if he lands in the wrong spot, because theoretically, Colston Loveland was more of a wrong spot situation as well, right? Because of the amount of competition that he had in terms of, oh my gosh, they've got DJ Moore, they've got Roma Dunse, they drafted Luther Burden. Like, there's a lot going on here. Like, what is the target volume going to, they've got Cole Kmet on Ross. What's the target volume going to be? Eventually talent wins out, right? We see that. It took him a while to get there, but eventually he got there, and the upside was just so stupid at that point. So Kenyon Sadiq, yeah. Even if it's not the perfect spot, we could still be looking at him as somebody who is absolutely going to shoot up in the conversation because, the talent is just so extreme. We're blessed year after year. We are blessed year after year. And that's sometimes why I can't why I don't feel like I have to draft a high-end tight end, because every single year we have these highly athletic, I don't know what's in the water or whatever, but they are putting out these athletic freak tight ends just year after year after year that are, hey, we don't care about the blocking, man. We care about the fact that you are just a massive giant receiver, right? And we're getting them constantly. So yeah, I'm excited on that one. We've got some guys that can fall to the right places and just really, really be massive production. And quite frankly, even if you fall to the wrong place, we'll figure it out, right? Because talent will shine through for sure. Like even like a Rondé Gadsden, loved him as a prospect. Did you love the landing spot there in LA? You were like, it's okay. We didn't even have him active for a couple of weeks there, but eventually talent won out, right? So for sure we got so much talent there at tight end. Super excited to see those guys, him and Eli Stowers. All right, that wraps things up, people. I'm gonna go enjoy this first 4 play-in game here with SMU and Miami, Ohio. Yeah, SMU and Miami, Ohio there. And continue to do some work here. It's going to be a busy night, but I appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you so much. Again, this is the Dear Miss Fantasy Show. It is available on all podcast platforms. Hopefully we have some more big news and trades and stuff that happen here. We're closing on the draft too. Good Lord. Maybe we talk a little bit additional draft content next week to get us prepped for that for sure. Some updated incoming rookie rankings and whatnot we can look at. But otherwise, we'll talk about more of the free agency stuff and whatnot and dive into it. Maybe talk some sleepers for Dynasty and redraft. And we'll continue on. I'll be live with you every single Wednesday this off season as we prepare for the fantasy season. I appreciate you all tuning in. Again, the podcast is available on all platforms. Thank you, Derek. I really appreciate that. Derek Lincoln, shout out to you. Always here. One of the loyal watchers. I appreciate your comments. Always fantastic comments. Appreciate you always tuning in for sure. Shout out to Derek Lincoln. Appreciate for the super chat there. But thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you're not following, make sure that you're following the YouTube channel and Player Profiler as well, who this podcast is through. Thank you very much. Appreciate you all. Thank you so much. And hey, I just saw Rachel join in. Hi, Rachel in the chat. Thank you for tuning in. I will talk to you all again next week. Enjoy March Madness. Again, if you guys are March Madness fans, chat with me on Twitter and whatnot, because it's going to be a fun tournament. Other than that, I will see you all here next Wednesday. Have a fantastic week. We'll talk later.